The rain had begun before dawn, soft at first, then steadily soaking the ancient stones of Ashcombe estate until the entire countryside lay beneath a muted silver veil. Within the crumbling manor, Lady Eleanor Ashcombe pressed her fingers against the cold window pane, watching the droplets chase one another in crooked paths. She felt an odd kinship with them, quiet, constrained, forever falling without permission. For years she had lived in that house, as though she were a relic locked behind glass, a precious object no one was allowed to touch or even truly see. Her uncle insisted she remain within the estate, claiming it was for her safety, her reputation, her delicate constitution. But Eleanor knew the truth. He feared the world would remember her, and he feared even more what she might remember about herself. Eleanor's days passed with a predictable monotony. She walked the same overgrown gardens, traced the same dust-laden banisters, and read the same tattered novels she had inherited from her mother. Even her conversations were dull replications of the day before, for Lord Percival disliked her speaking to anyone beyond the household staff, and the servants, fearful of his temper, avoided lingering near her. Isolation clung to her like a second skin. Though still young, she often felt as if she had aged in silence, as though the world had carved years from her without ever granting her the chance to live them. Yet rumors about her persisted in the outside world, drifting like wayward leaves through London social circles. Whispers told of a reclusive beauty hidden in a decaying estate, a young lady so rarely seen that she might as well belong to another era entirely. Eleanor knew nothing of these stories, but she sensed the way the world had continued without her, and she wondered if perhaps it preferred her absence. Her uncle, meanwhile, pursued his schemes with meticulous ambition. He hoped to marry her to an elderly viscount whose wealth and connections would benefit him enormously. Eleanor suspected the arrangement long before she overheard it spoken aloud. Her uncle's tone, sharp and calculating, revealed his intentions even when his words did not. The knowledge settled in her chest like a weight she could neither dislodge nor accept. Everything shifted the morning the royal carriage arrived. Its glossy black frame and gold trim shone through the mist like something conjured from a dream, or perhaps a warning. The royal seal glimmered on the envelope handed to Lord Percival, and Eleanor watched his expression tighten as he read the contents. The Prince Regent himself had summoned the Ashcombe heiress to a reception at Carlton House, a command, not a request. Eleanor's heart fluttered with a strange mix of anticipation and dread. She had never attended a season, never stepped foot in London's glittering circles, never known the thrill of being seen. Her uncle, however, looked as though he had been struck. He muttered about obligations, lineage, appearances that must be maintained. But beneath his bluster, she sensed fear. He could not refuse royal summons, yet he could not risk losing control over her. The carriage ride to London felt longer than any journey she had ever taken. Outside, the world rushed past. Villages, meadows, the winding river glinting under clouds. Inside, she sat opposite her uncle, who corrected her posture, her gaze, even the way she folded her hands. "Remember," he said more than once, "speak only when spoken to." Each admonition pricked her like thorns. When they arrived at Carlton House, Eleanor felt the breath leave her. The palace glowed under hundreds of lanterns, its windows glittering like polished jewels. Music floated through the open doors, mingling with laughter and the faint clinking of crystal. People elegant and radiant stepped from their carriages, their gowns sweeping across the stone steps like splashes of color. But the moment Eleanor stepped inside, she sensed something shift. Conversations faltered, faces turned. A ripple of whispers followed her like a shadow. She tried to keep her eyes lowered, but fragments of gossip reached her nonetheless. Speculation about her isolation, her health, her mind. Someone murmured that she looked like a ghost resurrected for the evening. Lord Percival tightened his grip on her arm, digging his fingers into her sleeve with subtle cruelty. "Do not embarrass me," he hissed through clenched teeth, as though her very presence threatened his schemes. Eleanor swallowed the sting of humiliation and tried to steady her breathing. The chandeliers above sparkled with thousands of candles, yet she felt unbearably small beneath their brilliance. She wandered only as far as her uncle allowed, moving through clusters of guests who observed her with thinly veiled curiosity. The weight of their scrutiny pressed against her ribs. She wanted to disappear, to hide behind the velvet drapes, or flee back into the quiet familiarity of Ashcombe. And yet, beneath her fear, something else stirred, a fragile hope, trembling like a newly lit flame. It was then that the atmosphere shifted once more. Conversation softened. A slow hush spread across the towering ballroom, like wind sweeping through tall grass. Eleanor sensed, rather than saw, that someone significant had entered. The air itself seemed to lean toward him. She looked up. Across the marble floor, framed by the glow of chandeliers and the open archways of Carlton House, stood a man whose presence commanded the room without a single word. Tall, composed, shoulders squared with the ease of one accustomed to authority. His dark hair brushed the collar of his coat, and an aura of restrained power surrounded him. The murmurs reached her. The Duke of Regency-era had returned at last, and he was looking directly at her. For a moment, Eleanor could not breathe. She did not understand why his gaze held hers with such startling intensity, nor why something in her chest fluttered in response. Her uncle stiffened beside her, sensing danger in the Duke's interest. But Eleanor barely noticed him. The room, the whispers, the glittering crowd, all faded until only the Duke remained. And in that suspended instant, she felt as though the world she had known was turning, slowly, irrevocably, toward a future she had never imagined but could no longer refuse. Ever. The Duke of Regency-era moved through the ballroom with a precision that seemed almost predestined, each step measured, deliberate, his gaze never faltering from the figure at the far end. Lady Eleanor Ashcombe remained rooted near the marble staircase, her gloved hands twisting nervously, her heart betraying her composure with a rapid, staccato rhythm. Though the room swirled with music and conversation, a hush fell in her vicinity as if the air itself acknowledged the gravity of his approach. The courtiers, skilled in the art of observation and rumor, sensed an unspoken history between them and leaned in, whispering questions masked as polite conjecture. "Is that truly the Ashcombe heiress?" one murmured. "And does the Duke of Regency-era?" The insinuation lingered, electric and unrelenting. Eleanor felt her pulse spike, yet she maintained a delicate tilt of the chin, a posture drilled into her by years of etiquette. But it could not disguise the quickened beat of her heart or the flush creeping to her cheeks. Adrian Hawthorne, the Duke, paused just short of the staircase. His eyes, sharp and fathomless, drank in the sight of her, cataloging the subtle changes that time had etched upon her face and bearing. Her hair, once wild and unkempt during his recollections of Ashcombe summers, now fell in carefully arranged waves around her shoulders, the rich brown catching the candlelight in copper undertones. Her gown, modest in its Regency elegance, clung to her form without ostentation, and yet it only magnified her presence, for in that simple restraint there lay a beauty he had never forgotten. His lips pressed into a line of deliberate composure, but in the depths of his gaze, a storm of past affection and present resolve swirled. "Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice cutting through the soft strains of the orchestra, formal yet threaded with something private, a tether between them invisible to all others. The hush of the ballroom seemed to amplify each syllable. She inclined her head with a courtesy, a gentle dip that spoke of ingrained manners but concealed the tumult within. Her gloved fingers brushed against her dress as she whispered, "Your Grace." The mere act of addressing him felt weighty, as though every letter carried years of unspoken words. Adrian's lips quirked in a shadow of a smile, his hand hovering momentarily before he allowed propriety to reign, returning it to his side. "You have been hidden from the world for far too long, Lady Eleanor," he said, gaze scanning the crowd with a flicker of challenge. Whispers rose like ripples in water. Some courtiers leaned closer, eager to witness the unfolding drama. while others averted their eyes, sensing that decorum was teetering on the brink of scandal. Eleanor's uncle, Lord Percival, stiffened, the color draining from his face as he realized the audacity of the Duke's approach. He opened his mouth, perhaps to rebuke, perhaps to command, but Adrian's presence silenced him before words could escape. Without hesitation, Adrian crossed the remaining distance, each step deliberate, as though the room and all its observers existed merely as a backdrop to this singular moment. Eleanor's breath caught as he stopped before her, close enough that the scent of his cologne, subtle, refined, yet undeniably masculine, touched her senses. "You are not to be hidden any longer," he murmured, quiet enough for only her to hear, yet brimming with a weight that made her spine straighten involuntarily. Her heart raced, her composure faltering as the full magnitude of the moment pressed down upon her. He reached for a delicate, folded token he had concealed beneath the folds of his coat. A pressed bluebell, its petals still retaining the faintest memory of Ashcombe's overgrown gardens. With a motion both discreet and deliberate, he placed it into her gloved hand. Eleanor's fingers trembled slightly, closing over the small flower, and her eyes met his in a gaze that conveyed more than words ever could. The gesture was at once intimate and rebellious, a private declaration amid the scrutiny of society. The murmurs around them swelled again, some startled by the boldness of the act, others scandalized by its audacity, yet neither could ignore it. Eleanor felt the weight of countless eyes upon them. Yet for the first time in years, she experienced the heady liberation of being seen, not as a prisoner, not as a pawn, but as a person whose very existence commanded attention. The courtiers, ever vigilant for discord, seized upon the opportunity to gossip, their voices now tinged with envy and suspicion. A duchess, long accustomed to admiring Adrian's attentions as a distant pleasure, leaned toward a companion, her voice a mere whisper, yet sharp as a blade. "Surely the heiress cannot claim his regard. It is unheard of, improper." The words carried through the marble corridors, wrapping around Eleanor like a thin, constricting veil, yet the Duke's gaze never wavered. His presence alone was a shield against ridicule, a silent vow that her dignity, fragile though it had been, would remain intact. Eleanor's hands still clutched the bluebell, and she felt the weight of its significance more acutely than she had ever anticipated. This small, pressed flower bore not just a memory of her childhood, but a declaration. He had remembered her when the world had forgotten. She dared a subtle glance at Adrian, and his expression softened, revealing a depth of tenderness that no etiquette could conceal. In that moment, she sensed the contours of a promise, that beyond the scrutiny, beyond the court's judgment, he would stand beside her. Lord Percival, sensing the shift, moved to intervene, his voice rigid with authority. "This conversation, Your Grace, is wholly improper. My niece." Adrian's hand rose, steady and commanding, halting the protest before it fully formed. "It is proper," he said evenly, each word deliberate, "that she be seen for what she truly is, and not for the shadows you have cast over her life." The crowd stilled, a ripple of gasps followed. Eleanor felt a thrill of astonishment mingle with fear, her uncle's power challenged so openly that it seemed almost unreal. For years he had dictated her world, and yet now, before the eyes of the Regency court, the balance had begun to shift. Adrian leaned slightly closer, his voice dropping to a tone meant only for her ears, and Eleanor felt a shiver of anticipation. "If you fear the court," he whispered, "fear me instead, for I shall not let them dictate the measure of your life." Her pulse quickened, not from the danger of the moment, but from the unspoken promise it carried. She realized, with a sudden clarity, that she had never truly been free. Not until now. Not until he had chosen to confront the world on her behalf. The music continued, the candles flickered, and yet all else faded. The bluebell pressed between her fingers, Adrian's unwavering gaze, and the growing defiance in her heart became the center of her universe. She no longer felt like a shadow. She felt, for the first time, seen. And in that fleeting, suspended instant, Eleanor understood that her life was poised upon the cusp of irrevocable change. The Duke's bold gesture had ignited a spark that neither propriety nor gossip, nor her uncle's oppressive hand could extinguish. As the ballroom buzzed with whispers, Eleanor's thoughts coalesced into one undeniable certainty. This evening would mark the beginning of a battle not of swords, but of hearts. And the first move had already been made. The tension hung in the air, palpable and electric, as the Duke's presence anchored her trembling spirit. The world beyond the ballroom, the whispers, the judgment, the threats, would come to bear, but for this moment, the prisoner within the Ashcombe estate felt the stirrings of liberation. She dared to lift her chin a fraction higher, and in that simple, defiant act, she stepped toward the uncertain, intoxicating promise that the Duke of Regency-era had placed in her palm. The evening had darkened into a velvet hush, the grand chandeliers casting a golden glow that danced across polished marble and gilded walls. Outside, the city's lights twinkled faintly, yet within Carlton House, the world seemed to shrink until it contained only two figures moving with cautious intent. Adrian Hawthorne, the Duke of Regency-era, guided Lady Eleanor Ashcombe through a side corridor, his gloved hand steadying hers when the tremor of uncertainty threatened to betray her composure. Every footstep echoed against the high ceilings, a rhythmic accompaniment to the rapid beating of her heart. She had never known freedom like this, not even in dreams. The sense of danger and exhilaration intertwined, leaving her senses acutely alive. The scent of waxed wood, the faint perfume of exotic blooms from a distant conservatory, the whisper of her gown against the polished floor. "Why have you brought me here?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a murmur, laced with curiosity, apprehension, and a fragile hope she dared not fully embrace. The Duke's eyes met hers, deep and unwavering, and he offered only a soft, assured smile. "To speak as the world will not permit," he said, his tone low, yet imbued with authority. There was no trace of arrogance, only the quiet insistence that she be heard, that her words, her grief, her story, be acknowledged without distortion or judgment. She felt the weight of the years she had spent in silence pressing against her chest, and the sudden proximity of someone who understood. Even partially, the magnitude of that confinement was almost unbearable. They reached a small conservatory, hidden behind the grandeur of the ballroom. Glass panes stretched overhead, and moonlight filtered through, illuminating exotic ferns and flowering vines that seemed to lean inward, curious and protective. Rain from earlier had left faint streaks on the glass, glittering like tiny stars. The room was both intimate and clandestine, a secret enclave where societal scrutiny could not follow. Eleanor's breath caught at the sight, the space's quiet grandeur contrasting sharply with the harsh scrutiny of the ballroom. She dared to relax, though only slightly, leaning against a marble pedestal as she allowed her eyes to trace the curves of the glass ceiling. Adrian moved closer, maintaining the decorum demanded of gentlemen, while closing the distance enough to offer a sense of comfort, a tether to the courage she had nearly forgotten she possessed. "Speak freely, Lady Eleanor," he urged gently. "No one here will censure, no one will dictate. Not tonight." His voice was a balm, stirring memories of days past when she had been seen not as a pawn, not as a fragile object to be displayed or hidden, but as a girl with agency, wit, and heart. A delicate tremor ran through her, an acknowledgement of the tension that had been building in her chest for years. She felt simultaneously vulnerable and emboldened, the duality that defined every encounter she had ever had with him now magnified in this secluded space. Tears threatened as she began to recount the confines of her existence. The suffocating control of her uncle, the relentless monotony, the whispered plans for her life that she had never consented to. Each word she spoke trembled with fragility and strength alike, a confession she had carried in secret for far too long. Adrian listened in silence, his gaze fixed upon her with a quiet intensity that refused interruption. There was no judgment in his eyes, only acknowledgment and the subtle pressure of loyalty, the kind that had once defined his protective instinct when she had been a child at Ashcombe. The vulnerability of her admission allowed the first sparks of trust and relief to flicker within her. She realized, even amid the embarrassment of exposing herself, that she was not alone in bearing the burden of her past. Adrian's own confession followed, tentative yet unwavering, revealing the years he had spent searching for her, the diplomatic missions undertaken abroad that had never dimmed the memory of her face. "I remembered," he admitted, his voice low and almost reverent. "Not the child you were, but the promise of who you could be, and the world we were denied in those years apart." Eleanor's hands, still gloved, twitched almost imperceptibly, brushing against one another as though drawn toward the truth of his words. The gesture, so minor yet so charged, mirrored the tentative connection forming between them, a bridge built upon mutual recognition, history, and the longing that neither had fully acknowledged until now. A silence stretched between them, not empty but heavy with the weight of unspoken possibilities. Adrian's presence radiated certainty, and yet, in his restraint, Eleanor sensed the patience required for her to claim her voice fully. It was a dance of power and vulnerability, one that demanded both courage and trust. She finally dared a small step forward, the motion nearly imperceptible, yet signaling a willingness to engage beyond the bounds of etiquette. He responded with a slight incline of his head, a silent acknowledgement that her choice mattered more than any protocol or scandal looming in the ballroom beyond. The intimacy of the conservatory intensified as Eleanor revealed the intricate details of her imprisonment. The isolation enforced with meticulous attention, the moments of small cruelty hidden behind polite manners, the suffocating fear of being married off without consent. Each sentence was a thread, weaving a tapestry of her resilience and suppressed desire for autonomy. Adrian's reactions were measured, yet every line of his posture, every subtle tightening of his jaw, conveyed the gravity of her words and his commitment to her welfare. The atmosphere between them thickened with unspoken affection, a tension so refined it bordered on pain, the ache of years lost and opportunities stolen. The first physical connection, tentative yet electric, occurred when Eleanor's hand brushed against his as he reached to guide her toward a bench. Gloves touched, fingers nearly intertwined, and a spark ignited that neither etiquette nor fear could fully contain. Their eyes met again, and in that look lay unuttered promises, a silent pact that the world might oppose them, but their hearts would speak regardless. For a brief moment, the conservatory became a universe of its own. Rain-streaked glass, flickering candlelight, and the charged air of two souls converging after years of separation. Eleanor whispered a question, barely audible. "If we are seen together, what will become of me?" The vulnerability in her voice betrayed the depth of her anxiety, and yet the curiosity, the flicker of hope, could not be suppressed. Adrian leaned closer, voice hushed yet firm. "Then let the world witness what it must. I will stand with you. You shall no longer endure in shadows." There was no boast, no theatrical flourish, only the weight of a vow, tempered by tenderness and certainty. Her heart responded instinctively, the fragile hope of liberation intertwining with the stirrings of desire she had fought to suppress. The conservatory's night stretched, each moment laden with implication, each glance, each near touch, a dance of propriety and passion restrained. Eleanor realized the contours of her own courage, the resilience cultivated in years of silent endurance. Adrian's presence illuminated possibilities she had not allowed herself to imagine. Freedom, dignity, affection unmediated by family tyranny or societal expectation. She felt the first whisper of empowerment, the thrill of having her existence acknowledged as hers alone. And yet, the tension remained taut, for beyond the glass walls and ornate doors, the ballroom awaited, filled with scrutiny, judgment, and potential scandal. As the rain's rhythm on the glass slowed to a gentle patter, Eleanor understood that the evening's revelations were only the beginning. The Duke had not merely offered companionship. He had provided an opportunity for her to reclaim her voice, to confront the world, and to stake a claim upon her own life. The delicate intimacy of their shared confessions, the brush of gloves, and the shared understanding of past sorrows forged a bond stronger than any whispered scandal could sever. In that moment, Eleanor's fear mingled with exhilaration, and she recognized that her fate had shifted irrevocably, from passive confinement to active engagement in a battle of hearts, wills, and society's judgment. As they rose from the bench, poised to return to the ballroom and face the watching eyes once more, Eleanor's gaze met Adrian's, steady and unwavering. The storm of emotion she had carried for years, the loneliness, the shame, the longing, now mingled with hope and anticipation. The next steps would demand courage, and yet, for the first time, she felt ready. The Duke's hand extended toward hers, a bridge between past and future, and in the charged silence, Eleanor knew that the course of her life was no longer dictated by another's design. The confrontation with society, with her uncle, and with her own fears loomed imminent. Yet in the sanctuary of that moonlit conservatory, she had tasted the first true freedom of her heart. The ballroom awaited them, its vast expanse glittering with candlelight that reflected off polished marble and gilded balustrades. Yet for Eleanor Ashcombe, the grandeur now seemed less a prison and more a stage upon which her life would finally be claimed. She followed Adrian Hawthorne, the Duke of Regency-era, through the towering doors, each step deliberate, her pulse echoing in rhythm with the quiet tension that had replaced the music in her mind. Every eye turned as they emerged, whispers rippling like wind through tall grass. The court sensed the return of the Ashcombe heirs from obscurity, yet none could have predicted the audacity of her companion. Adrian's presence alone silenced speculation. His posture straight, eyes calm, exuded authority that seemed to bend the world to his will. He offered Eleanor his hand, a gesture both formal and intimate, and she accepted it, the contact a tether that anchored her courage. Lord Percival's expression contorted at the sight, the carefully maintained mask of control cracking. "Lady Eleanor," he began, voice tight with indignation. "You will—" His command faltered as Adrian's gaze met his with quiet, unyielding steel. "She will do as she chooses," Adrian declared, voice low but carrying through the hushed murmurs of the assembly. Not as dictated by fear or convention, but as demanded by her own heart. The words were incendiary in their simplicity, a challenge that pierced the careful facades of the aristocracy. Eleanor felt a shiver of exhilaration. Never before had she imagined a man would confront the world on her behalf, and never one so recklessly noble. The courtiers exchanged glances, some incredulous, some scandalized, others quietly delighted. The murmur of the ballroom swelled into a tide of curiosity, yet Adrian's calm dominance rendered objections almost impotent. He guided Eleanor to the center of the floor, where the light from the grand chandelier fell upon them like a golden spotlight. Every detail, the shimmer of her gown, the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the intensity of his dark eyes, was framed for the court's gaze. Eleanor's fingers trembled slightly in his. The bluebell pressed their moments before now, a secret symbol of their shared past and unspoken promise. She lifted her chin, a subtle defiance against years of subjugation, and for the first time, she felt the weight of her uncle's control dissipate. Adrian spoke again, his voice now resonating with authority tempered by tenderness. "I claim Lady Eleanor Ashcombe not as a possession, but as a woman of dignity, intellect, and courage. She has been hidden, constrained, and silenced for too long. Tonight, she stands free, and I shall bear witness to it." The room was silent, save for the gentle clink of crystal and the subtle rustle of silk as the nobility processed the declaration. Some gasped audibly, some whispered behind fans, unable to contain the shock. Eleanor felt the swell of pride in her chest, a fierce, exhilarating pride that she had never known before. The audacity of the Duke, the clarity of his declaration, had transformed her from a shadowed figure into a force that demanded recognition. Lord Percival moved, his hand lifting as though to interrupt, but the Prince Regent's eyes, ever watchful, ever calculating, settled upon him with a cool, measured scrutiny. A single nod, almost imperceptible, signaled that Percival's authority held no weight here tonight. Eleanor's uncle froze, the reality of his impotence dawning with the slow, merciless clarity of a winter morning. Adrian's hand tightened around hers, subtle but firm, and in that small gesture lay the promise of protection and partnership, a defiance against every oppressive whisper she had endured. Eleanor drew in a steadying breath, allowing herself to feel the extraordinary, almost dizzying sense of power. Her own life was hers to command, witnessed by all and sanctioned by the Duke's unwavering support. The whispers continued, now tinged with awe and speculation rather than malice. A duchess who had once deemed herself untouchable paused, her eyes narrowing as she regarded the pair. Yet even she could not deny the force of the moment, the audacity, the elegance, the unmistakable claim of a man whose presence could shift the currents of society with a single word. Eleanor felt the weight of history and expectation lift from her shoulders, replaced with a fragile exhilaration. Every whispered judgment, every disapproving glance, was rendered impotent by the Duke's intervention and the subtle sanction of royal favor. Adrian's gaze returned to hers, softer now, and he lowered his voice so that only she could hear. "This is but the first step, Eleanor. The world may resist, society may challenge, yet we face it together." His words carried the authority of experience, the depth of unspoken affection, and the promise that nothing, neither rumor, nor scandal, nor familial tyranny, could diminish their bond. Eleanor's lips curved into the faintest, tremulous smile, a gesture of courage born from years of quiet suffering. She realized, in that instant, that her life had shifted irrevocably, from passive confinement to an active claim upon her own destiny. The ballroom remained suspended in a moment of tense wonder, every guest caught between fascination and disapproval, yet the Duke and the heiress moved with a certainty that transcended social constraints. Eleanor's pulse had steadied. She felt the firm, protective warmth of Adrian's hand against her own, a connection that grounded her even amid the potential storm of gossip. In the quiet intimacy of that touch, she sensed the promise of partnership, of a shared life that acknowledged her autonomy while celebrating their shared history and burgeoning affection. As the evening progressed, the Duke led Eleanor through the assembled guests, each bow, each whispered acknowledgement reinforcing her restored dignity. The subtle power of their union, defiance tempered with elegance, affection cloaked in propriety, was not lost on those who observed. Every step they took was a reclamation of identity and agency, a testament to the courage required to confront not only society's rigid structures, but one's own internalized fears. Eleanor's eyes met Adrian's frequently, each glance a silent conversation, a mutual acknowledgement that the path ahead would require both vigilance and trust, yet also promised a freedom she had only dared imagine. At last, the Duke guided her toward the garden doors, where lantern light flickered across damp cobblestones, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters. Eleanor paused, breathing in the crisp night air, and felt the weight of her liberation settle around her like a cloak woven from light and courage. Adrian's hand remained firm in hers, a silent promise that the world's scrutiny need not define her experience. "You are free," he whispered, the words a caress as tangible as the grip of his hand. "And the choice of what comes next is yours alone." Eleanor lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes with an intensity that matched the fervor swelling in her chest. For the first time in years, she felt not fear, not shame, but the exhilarating clarity of self-possession. The grandeur of the Regency court, the whispers of scandal, the expectations imposed upon her since birth, All had been confronted and found powerless in the presence of one man's unwavering regard. As she stepped into the lantern-lit garden, hand in hand with Adrian, she understood that the journey ahead would challenge them both. Yet in that moment, love and liberation coalesced, binding them together in a promise more enduring than any societal decree. The night stretched infinitely, the shadows of the garden embracing them as if the world beyond had receded entirely. Eleanor's heart beat in rhythm with the promise of possibility, and in Adrian's unwavering gaze, she recognized the extraordinary truth that a life once imprisoned could be reclaimed, that courage could illuminate the darkest corridors, and that love, patient and resolute, could command the attention of even the most scrutinizing eyes. The stage had been set, the declaration made, and the heiress of Ashcombe had, at last, stepped into a life of her own making, guided by a hand that would never falter, a heart that would never yield, and a love that, at long last, was unmistakably hers.